Welcome back. It is exactly 9:37 a.m. This is News and Views with me, Julie Ali. Next on the show, we have Gideon Joubert. He is the CEO of Dear South Africa. We're going to be talking about a proposed bill that could put an end to petitions and public participation. And undoubtedly, if that bill does get passed, I kind of wonder how it's going to strangle the voice of the media, or is that a totally different issue? A very good morning to you, Gideon. Welcome to the program.
Good morning, Julie and listeners, and thank you so much for inviting me and having me on here to talk about this bill.
Before we get to the bill, tell me very quickly about Dear South Africa. Is it about focusing on the situation, good and bad, here in South Africa, very especially as far as bills, rights, etc., laws that impact on everyday South Africans? Is that what you're all about?
So we are a public participation platform. So all that we do is whenever there's a bill, which is either a new proposed piece of legislation or a proposed amendment bill to already existing legislation, or any other process, whether it's an approval or disapproval of proposed municipal rates and taxes, any of those processes that require by law to go for public participation, and there's a fair number of such processes that are constitutionally mandated to go for it, we facilitate that process in order for it to be transparent, that people's comments get where they need to get, that they are properly publicly counted, as well as that there's an accurate executive summary and feedback that's given not only to the originator, whether it's a portfolio committee or a minister or someone else, and the public who participated in it, pertaining to what the public view is on an issue. And that has strengthened a whole bunch of responses with regard to these processes and amendments. Sometimes court cases, sometimes these things were sent back to the drawing board. That's basically what we do.
I'm particularly concerned about this bill. The question coming up about this proposed bill. Do we know which minister is it that proposed this bill? And it sounds pretty ominous for you and I and every other South African. Very problematic indeed. It's a great example of government overreach. Anybody who's outspoken against the government, yours truly as well, or its policies, can be listed as a terrorist. That is very, very, very alarming indeed.
So this particular bill originates from the Portfolio Committee on Police. So that would indicate the Minister of Police, Becky Cele. And as you correctly point out, what's very worrying about it is the potential implications that it has. And those implications arise from how vague the language use in this bill is. Now, bear in mind, the amendment sets a very broad definition of what constitutes terrorist activity. And there is no single internationally agreed upon definition of what terrorism actually is. So the very broad definition of it is highly problematic. And it would essentially enable the state to criminalize any citizen that supports, for example, one side of a controversial topic, or even people that criticize the government's policies or legislation. And they would criminalize these acts as encouragement or indirect facilitation of terrorism. So the potential for massive overreach exists and is baked into this thing, and that's what's really concerning.
The other issue as well, we spoke about terrorism and what you or I or anyone else perceives as terrorism, and each one of us perceives it very, very differently. So it's really, those type of issues is really about perception, is it not? But that being said, you can respond with my next question as well. This bill could put an end to petitions and public participation in South Africa. What do we understand by the term public participation? When you take a matter up as Dear South Africa, do you need to have a gazillion signatures? How do you go and present the case as, this is an issue and the public are participating full on in this matter? So I've thrown a couple of questions at you.
So that's a very good question. And quantity does matter, but the quality of the comments received actually have a far greater impact. So we've had very successful public participation campaigns with as few as 7,000 public comments. Around about 20,000 is considered a very successful campaign. But lately, we've seen a significant increase in the number of citizens that actually participate in these campaigns. It's not uncommon now for a single campaign to go on over about 70,000 and well over 100,000 individual submissions. So the general public is, I think, waking up to the value that public participation holds, how important it is as a mechanism, a bulwark, so to say, against government overreach, and to make their voices heard pertaining whether they support good policy or oppose what they see as bad policy. The bill would, in essence, criminalize these types of activities, because any criticism of government policy could be seen as a terrorist activity, and criticism could come in the form of an individual making a legitimate, relevant public comment on a proposal, and we equally could become criminalized for facilitating that public comment. And you rightly pointed out in the beginning of this conversation that journalists wouldn't be, especially investigative journalists, wouldn't be, escape the potential consequences either. So it's again one of those situations, a vague bill that creates far too broad a potential definition, and then it just opens up these channels for massive potential abuse.
We're supposed to be a democracy, supposedly one of the best democracies in the world. And does our constitutional rights not protect us from something like this? You're also indicating that it's a very vague bill. So how does one move forward as far as public participation is concerned? How are you and other such organizations like yourself going to present your argument to this piece of ridiculous, legislation or bill?
So this is not the first sort of blatantly unconstitutional proposed bill that we've seen and that's come through our platform. There's been quite a few previously, and you are correct in saying our constitution strongly protects all these rights: freedom of association, freedom of expression. There's nothing in the constitution that elevates the sanctity of the state above the sanctity of individual human rights, even of most basic freedoms. So what would happen, what the process is pertaining this, is public comments on this bill close on the 18th of October. It's been extended a little bit. So we call upon the general public to make their voices heard. We've had about 15,500 comments on it so far. We could appreciate another 15,000 more pertaining their position on this bill and its potential consequences, whether they agree or disagree. Once this public participation process comes to an end, what we then do is we summarize and present the results of the campaign, which in this case is already strongly negative. And that educates and informs the portfolio committee on what the public view is of this bill, which is probably going to be very negative. In the event of it then not being kicked back to the minister or whomever is responsible for drafting it, and it gets adopted and the process continues, there are many places in this process where legal challenges, and there are a great number of organizations that have expressed interest in bringing legal challenge. What DRSA then typically does is we take our summaries, our results, our expertise, and we don't necessarily join as an additional applicant, but we join as a friend of the court in order to support, or as an expert witness in order to support these arguments, in order to protect the public interest, so to speak, or to protect the public participation process. So we are taking this very seriously, and we would recommend that the public make their voices heard, because their voices matter. It has a massive impact. So please don't feel discouraged by what's written in it.
So obviously you have strong mechanisms in place, many such mechanisms in place if you are overridden by the portfolio community. Can they take a unilateral decision at any stage, or will they be met with all of those issues that you've spoken about, friend of the court, legal action, etc.?
So there is a certain degree of unilateral action that they can take, but it's never truly without consequence, and it's never truly unilateral. So there are many processes in place, but at the same time, there are also many constitutional safeguards built into it. So worst case scenario is you may see the adoption of a flagrantly unconstitutional piece of legislation, that does open itself up to challenge. The problem is to challenge a piece of law once it's been passed in the constitutional court, or the constitutionality of it rather, in any court, becomes a very expensive and lengthy process. It is far easier and far more cost effective to actually challenge this such pieces of legislation or proposals before it gets signed into law. And public participation is one step of it. Depending upon the results of this process, it might go for a second round of public participation. They generally do, but there's still much water to go under the bridge. But we've seen it numerous times. We've seen it with the Firearms Amendment Bill. We've seen it with other controversial proposals, that when the public make their voices heard, it does make government think twice, and it does make them kind of withdraw bad legislation, shelve it, and decide on a different path forward.
I kind of wonder about these ministers. What is it that, what goes through their minds when they sit there and decide to come up with obviously a proposed bill? Is it because they want to seem as if they're doing work? Do they want to come across as being intelligent, applying their minds? Because I'm now just thinking, as you speak about this bill, I mean, this would be no different to living in Russia if this bill is passed. I mean, all of our freedoms will be taken away from us. And I'm even thinking, what's just popped into my head is that ridiculous idea of the minister, I can't remember his name now, who suggested that we put up a South African flag at the cost of 22 million rands. I mean, where was he coming from? What was he thinking? So what goes through these people's minds when they sit there and think up all of these ridiculous bills which they want to pass by the portfolio committee?
Julia, I wish I had a straight answer to that question for you, because that is the $1,000,000 question, quite literally. And we've seen a number of very, very vague, very poorly drafted, very poorly worded piece of proposed legislation go out for public comment over the past few months. It's almost reached its own pandemic level after the whole coronavirus business pertaining bad laws. And I think a bit of amateur political analysis from my part is we're seeing deep fractures within the ruling African National Congress. They've got a very combative national conference, elective conference coming up now in December.
Yes.
That's probably not going to be a fun kumbaya experience for anyone attending it. And you see paranoia take hold there because of the internal politics. You're definitely seeing paranoia because the projections for 2024 do not look particularly rosy for them to retain control of Parliament. Even with a coalition with the EFF, it's not looking particularly good. It all depends, obviously, on if the opposition is going to decide to play nicely with each other or not. So, I'm not counting my chickens before they've hatched. But I think there was a Roman philosopher, a Greek philosopher, that said the more corrupt a state, the more numerous its laws. And we're seeing a whole bunch of really bad legislative proposals go out. And whether or not this is being done in a panic, whether it's being done by design, I'm not, unfortunately, a mind reader. I can't tell you. But we're living in interesting times. But the positive message here is that your voice matters. The voice of your listeners matters. Apathy among citizens, I think, is a far greater threat to our democracy than tyrannical government. But active citizens taking ownership of their democracy is the strongest defense against any form of government overreach. And I think if people do use their voice, they must understand that it holds great power, and regardless of what other people and naysayers might say about it.
Well, we will be watching the space very, very closely, and undoubtedly we'll be talking with you again soon. Very quickly, can you just share with us a few of the wins on, your company regarding these type of situations, which you kind of took forward and worked on as dear South Africa, and just so that we can understand what you're all about. And how long are you in operation?
So we've been in operation since 2018, and between 2018 and 2022, we've delivered last count was about 4 million public comments on various campaigns. One of our biggest ones, one of our biggest campaigns, and this was not a single campaign, this was a series of campaigns, was on the expropriation without compensation that entire business. And I think it was just short of 1 million comments were delivered on that alone,
Wow.
of which the overwhelming majority rejected it. And the interesting thing about this is these were comments that were coming from Black South Africans, white South Africans. The overwhelming public as a whole disagree with the idea of expropriating private property without compensation. So that made a big difference in the direction that took in Parliament, and we are continuing to monitor that situation and be involved in it, with the expropriation bill now being adopted by the National Assembly. That was the latest thing that happened, but there's much more to that story. The proposed Firearms Control Amendment Act that would have banned self-defense as a reason to own a firearm in South Africa, that was a very successful campaign as well, where
Wow.
that legislation was withdrawn for further consideration. I'm trying to
Good.
think of a whole bunch of others. We were involved in the campaign about the fracking on the Wild Coast, where that court case.
Okay. We gave that story a lot of coverage right here on Salam Media, but let's leave it there. Gideon, it's
Yeah.
been wonderful talking with you. Undoubtedly, we will be talking a lot in the future. We need to obviously, publicize the type of work that you guys do. So lovely talking with you today. Thank you so very much. Let me just share a comment with you. Owalu Mohammed has sent in a message saying, very good, nice. So that's obviously a thumbs up for you and your organization. Go well, God bless, stay safe.
Thank you, Julie. You too. Have a wonderful day.
That was Gideon Joubert from Dear South Africa. He is the CEO of Dear South Africa. And of course, that was rather alarming, the proposed bill that could put an end to petitions and public participation. Good people, please go to their website, Dear South Africa, and make your voices heard. It is very important that this ridiculous bill is not passed at all. It is exactly 9:54 a.m. In a minute or two, we will be talking about the girl child and social activist Zuleika Patel is going to bring us up to speed regarding this issue.